This could be it. Pistol braces, bump stocks, and ghost guns all rolled into one. A Super Bowl of moving the goalposts and making felons, brought to you courtesy of President Biden, who is asking Attorney General Merrick Garland to clarify the statutory definition, doesn't that sound familiar, of something that you and I have done and will do. Will this make you a felon? What am I talking about? It's something that's super common. Guys, let's get into it. So President Biden cannot get his gun control agenda passed due to Republican control in Congress, at least not right now. So, in the finest of recent presidential traditions, it's time to start gaming the system. And to be clear, this is not a Democrat versus Republican thing. President Trump did this with bump stocks, and now Biden has done it with the privately manufactured firearms, aka ghost guns, as well as pistol braces. And here we go again. So the gun control advocates want universal background check. They've always wanted universal background check, and historically, we would probably know why if history is any teacher. Namely, universal background checks lead to registration, registration leads to confiscation, and just down that rabbit hole we go. But let's set that aside for a moment. Right now, the president and the gun controllers know that they cannot get universal background checks. So what are they going to do? They're going to be pivoting and they're going to be playing fast and loose, is my prediction, with some definitions. And this way, they don't have to go through Congress, or so they would claim in court. They will claim in court because, after all, they're simply reinterpreting some of what's already out there. Again, much like what the ATF has already done with privately manufactured firearms, pistol braces, and bump stocks. As long as we're trying to do this to protect the public and for the greater good, if some Americans wind up going to prison, so much the better, right? So let's just kind of start off right here. What is the current statute and what's the current situation? Due to the Gun Control Act in 1968, you are required to be licensed if you are in the business of selling firearms. If you are a licensed firearms dealer, then you are required to conduct background checks when selling or transferring a firearm. So the strategy will be, I predict, to expand the definition of who is in the business of selling firearms. 18 U.S.C. 922 sub A sub 21 sub C. That's a mouthful, say it 5 times fast. As applied to a dealer in firearms, as defined under different section, also found in the description box below, a person who devotes time, attention, and labor to dealing in firearms as a regular course of trade or business to predominantly earn a profit through the repetitive purchases and resale of firearms. But such a term shall not include a person who makes occasional sales, exchanges, or purchases of firearms for the enhancement of a personal collection, or for hobby, or who sells all or part of his personal collection of firearms. End quote. Again, you can find that statute as well as the other one that I referenced in the description box below. So the Gun Control Act advocates will be looking to basically play up and expand how little time, how little attention, and how little labor you need in order to trigger the definition of being a firearm dealer. Because again, if you're a firearm dealer, then you have to be licensed. And if you're licensed, well, hey, now you're going to have to maintain what's called a bound book, which is basically a record of every firearm you've taken in and every firearm that you've sold and transferred out. So that's going to be the magic mark here. That also means you're going to fall under ATF regulation, maybe a topic for another video. So you're probably asking yourself a pretty sensible question. How do I not go to prison in 2023, 2024, and beyond? That seems fair. I actually wake up and ask myself that on a daily basis as a criminal defense attorney. It's a little less relevant for me though, because I'm a reasonably boring guy, but just the same, in these changing times, it's something that I find myself as a firearm owner being forced to ask myself. So I want to give you a couple brief points in this video right here to describe what we're going to be talking about and what courts are going to be looking to determine whether or not you are in the business of selling firearms. Because courts have identified several factors relevant to determining on which side of that line your activities may fall. In other words, hobbyist, no license, or business, need a license. Whether you represent yourself as a dealer in firearms, whether you are repetitively buying and selling firearms, the circumstances under which you are selling firearms, and whether you are looking to make a profit. Now, I will add that the ATF has clarified that note that while the quantity and frequency of sales are relevant indicators, courts have upheld convictions for dealing without a license when as few as 2 firearms were sold, or when only 1 or 2 transactions took place when other factors were also present. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at this. Whether you represent yourself as a dealer in firearms, what does this mean? Well, a couple particular points without making this too long, because this is not our video on, are you a firearms dealer? that's coming up another time. Number one, are you telling people that you are a dealer of firearms? Are you handing out business cards, shirts, all that kind of stuff to indicate that, look, this is something that I absolutely do. I'm a dealer and I'm representing myself as such. Are you using dealer and retail vocabulary like restocking inventory, making advertisements? Those are kind of business sort of things. And again, none of this is to say that these are canonical, all-encompassing categories, but we're trying to describe what would differentiate between a hobbyist and someone who's in the business if the ATF or someone's going to be trying to put together a case against you down the lens saying that, look, you are a business dealer. Another factor the courts will look at is whether you are repetitively buying and selling firearms. So a hobbyist in the views of the government makes occasional sales to build their collection. A dealer in the views of the government, again, I'm only the messenger here, folks, don't come after me, is somebody who is repetitively engaged in sales. So we're talking about both the volume of firearms in a sale. So whether or not if you do one transaction with someone at a gun show and it's for 3 guns, 10 guns, or 20 guns, and whether or not, of course, number 2 is not only the volume involved in an individual sale, but also, of course, the number of times that you're selling firearms. After all, a hobbyist may be involved. Again, I'm only the messenger here, folks. The government would argue that a hobbyist is only going to be involved in sales maybe periodically and occasionally throughout the year. Someone who is dealing in firearms, in other words, they're in the business and require licensing, according to the government, is going to be someone who's maybe doing it on a weekly, daily, or perhaps monthly basis. I think ultimately the courts are going to unfortunately have to step in on this. And again, I'm not saying that in a cheerleading way. I just think that, frankly, they're going to get really aggressive on where that line goes. Another factor the courts will consider is the circumstances under which you are selling those firearms. Are you selling them shortly after acquiring them? So in other words, are you purchasing them on Monday, selling them on a Tuesday or the following week? Because everybody understands that you're going to buy something and maybe it's not for you or you don't use it and eventually it's going to go out. That's considered normal. It's part of the hobby. It's part of any hobby, whether you're collecting, I don't know, buttons, stamps. Again, I'm an old guy in my head, but that's going to be part of any hobby, right? You buy, you sell, you collect, your collection interests change and so forth. But if you're buying something on a Monday and selling it on Tuesday or Monday afternoon or some short time thereafter, so we're looking at the time connection, that's something that they're going to be looking at. How often does that happen? So if that happens once or something like that, hey, that's one thing. But are you frequently purchasing something on a Monday or Tuesday and selling it the next week? Because again, the volume and the frequency of that occurrence is absolutely going to factor into the government's case against you of whether or not you are in the business of selling firearms and therefore require a license. Are you frequently purchasing the same types of firearms? So if you buy 1 or 2 G19 Glocks in a given day, week, or month, that's one thing. But if you buy 50 of them at one time or in 1 month, the government's going to use that as part of their case against you. And again, only the messenger here, folks. I can just hear the clacking. Someone's going to make a comment saying that I'm like in favor of all this. I can just feel it. Another factor that the government's probably going to be looking at is, are you selling new firearms unopened and in factory original packaging? So again, somebody who's a hobbyist might be buying and selling used firearms, military surplus firearms, all that kind of stuff, fine. But in the government's case against an individual, and I've seen this before, again, former state prosecutor, criminal defense attorney here, when you see cases against individuals where the government's trying to say you down the lens, you are a dealer, one of the common things is they're looking at, for instance, just stacks of boxes of, for instance, Glocks, and nothing against Glocks. I'm a Glock guy myself. But, you know, if you've got 20 boxes or 50 boxes of everything's new in box, all factory original, you bought them and you're selling them that way, the government's going to say that this is all signs that once more you're in the business, because they would anticipate that a hobbyist would use the firearms, try the firearms, all that kind of stuff. After all, the government would argue, if you are a hobbyist and if you shot it, decide you didn't like it, put it back, that's one thing. But why are you buying 20 of the same one, not shooting them and leaving them all in the box? That sounds a little bit more like a business, so the government would allege. And finally, what we're talking about is whether you are looking to make a profit. Now, this gets tricky. Are you buying them at crazy low prices and then flipping them for a large profit? Because if you're doing that over and over and over again, or even just once or twice, I'm looking at you, civilian marksmanship program guys who are out there and you're maxing out your M1 Grands and everything else, then immediately flipping them onto Gunbroker like the same day that they come in. I'm shaking your head. Not because I'm in support of necessarily regulation. I'm shaking my head because you're taking all my M1 Grands. That's why I'm shaking my head. So that's going to be something they're going to be looking at. I mean, believe it or not, it has become part of cases that I've participated in, whether or not they're getting their firearms at high or low prices. Because after all, if somebody walks in to that gun store in town who's got the high prices, and you know what I'm talking about, right? There's always that one store in town that has really high prices and somehow they're still in business. My town has it too. So if you're buying them at sticker price, which is often at or above retail, and then selling them for comparable prices, then even if you are in the business, it's a really bad business, and you won't be in that business or any other business for long if you're buying and selling for about the same cost. But again, you have to be really careful, believe it or not, because if you do buy one or multiple firearms at really low prices, and then you sell them at a high time, while I understand buy low, sell high, that's, fundamentally what you're supposed to do with stocks and everything else, you are potentially backdooring a government's case against you for the fact that you bought that with the intention to sell it for profit, as opposed to you bought it with the intention to collect, and then later on you decided to resell it and it happened to be at a profit. There's a very important distinction between those two, and we'll see whether or not President Biden is going to be looking to blur those. But again, that's going to be something that you really have to pay attention to. And again, finally, it is important to note that courts have found that while you can buy and sell firearms with the principal objectives of livelihood and profit, even if your firearm-related activities are not your primary business. In other words, you can still be engaged in the business of dealing in firearms with the principal objective of livelihood and profit if you have a full-time job. The reason why these words are so important is because that's part of the statute that I did not cover here, but it is linked in the description box below, of whether or not somebody has become a firearms dealer is if they're engaged with the principal objective of livelihood and profit when they're going about their sales. And I understand perfectly well that plain reading that statute would seem to indicate that the principal objective of livelihood and profit to a lot of folks would be that, hey, this is your main job. The ATF has said that, no, this does not have to be your main job. So just be mindful of the fact, again, this isn't coming down to statutes. And no, I'm not asking you to like that. I'm not asking you to accept it. I'm just the messenger telling you how to not wind up in prison. So do as you will, but that's what it is. Guys, if you want a much more in-depth video about how to not become a firearms dealer and what are criteria that you look at when you become a firearms dealer, let me know in the description box below. Please click like. It'll help our video get out there. It'll also let me know which kind of content you want to see. And as always, we will see you in the next one. Guys, if you enjoyed this video, you might like some of the other content that we've been up to recently. Please feel free to check out these other videos. We'll see you in the next one.